Elizabeth Barrett Browning turns away from the primary traditions of Romanticism by engaging with contemporary social and political issues. She publishes The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point at the request of American abolitionists in 1848, and lends her voice to the Italian Risorgimento movement in much of her later poetry. But the reform movement of the mid-1800s in England aroused her indignation with 1843's The Cry of the Children. Now, this poem is getting more publication, more notice in recent decades. It was kind of forgotten and not anthologized that much for a long time, but it has found its way back in part of a resurgence of interest in women's voices and protest poetry generally, and the use of poetry to highlight the conditions of oppressed groups around the world and within society broadly. The curiosity of this poem is difficult to wrestle with at first glance. It is, on first reading, it can be a little overwhelming in its sentimentality, in its cloying nature, the over the top scorn that is invested in it, that is the empathy that is demanded from it. This can be tough to take, and on a first reading, it can be very difficult to look beyond those things. Those things are all there. You don't have to worry, they are there. You don't have to be uncertain about them, they are there. This is Browning at her most morally rigid, let's say. The traditions, the broad church traditions generally, that she comes out of are very high-handed and are generally assured of their own moral rectitude, and so feel obliged to push that upon other people, whether or not necessarily that's the best way to get them to go along with their plight politically. That is open for some debate. But it is, underneath all of that, I would say, a very interesting poem as a demonstration of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's versatility, of her use of the medium. The rhythms in this poem are really interesting. The meters that she is using, the rhymes that she is using, the curious mechanics of the art of poetry are, again, more interesting than the subject itself. So when you're reading this poem, you have to look at what's going on underneath all of it, at what strings she is actually pulling, even as she is soaring off into the ether with her content. What is the form of this poem actually doing to bring that about? And that's where I find the most intriguing aspects of this poem, which has some really good lines in it, has some really good points to make, and nobody is going to argue that child labor was not an awful thing that needed to get addressed. And she was, to her credit, lending her credibility, lending her celebrity, her art to that cause. So you can give her all the props for that. But pay attention to the craftsmanship she exercises in achieving that goal, or at least in pursuing it. It begins with a quote in Greek, a little showy, from the play Medea by Euripides. And this quotation is in this play, Medea, about a mother who kills her children to prevent them from growing up with her father and his new wife, who has just, or the father has just left Medea. So she kills her children rather than lose them in that way down the line. And that line essentially is translated as, "Alas, my children, why do you look at me?" Presumably, this is an admission more than a question, because the character Medea knows why the children might be a little afraid of her, or might be a little bit scornful of her. And the accusation, I think, is embedded in the defense. But also it does key on that word look in the translation, of course, in that word look, which I think is really the aspect that we need to bear in mind with what she is actually trying to do here, which would be in a practical religious sense, bearing witness. She is asking to witness the atrocities of child labor, the exploitation of little children, the robbing of these childhoods from these little people who, sure, maybe they're good workers, but at what cost? And that bearing witness, I think, is very significant in here. And watch for the way the poem is constantly forcing people who don't want to see that to confront the reality of it and admit it and acknowledge it. "Do ye hear the children weeping, O my brothers, ere the sorrow comes with years? They are leaning their young heads against their mothers, and that cannot stop their tears. The young lambs are bleating in the meadows, the young birds are chirping in the nest, the young fawns are playing with the shadows, the young flowers are blowing towards the west. But the young children, O my brothers, they are weeping bitterly. They are weeping in the playtime of the others, in the country of the free." Notice that first stanza, it begins with that direct address. It is getting in the face of the reader. Do you, pointing up at the page to the reader and putting the reader on the spot. It's an uncomfortable place to be. But notice also the references that we're getting here to children, to brothers. Mothers are shouted out here. A little bit later, we're going to hear about the fatherland. These familial references are hinting in a kind of subconscious way at a brotherhood of man, if you will, a family of humanity that some people may not recognize their link to, their connection to these cheap sources of labor that is making life really good for the upper class, but at what cost? It is also a very dramatic way to begin a poem, let's face it. Notice also the comparison with the youthful animals of nature and the young lambs, the young birds, young fawns, young flowers, and then the comparison to the young, that double young emphasizes children are the outlier here. The young children don't have that same experience of nature because they are caught up in the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment Revolution, let's say, of the 18th century. This is the cost. This is the downstream effects of that focus on rationalism and that focus on progress and all of that. And she is, in her way here, saying we have to rethink this. And here you can see her very much part of a romantic tradition of pushing back against that and focusing on children as opposed to the broader good of the Enlightenment age or the broader good of the industrial age and all of the luxuries that suddenly have and all of the improvements in society, quite frankly, that come from that and are built on that. Well, these things come at a cost, and she is pointing out the cost and forcing everybody to bear witness to the cost. Do you question the young children in the sorrow, why their tears are falling so? The old may weep for his tomorrow, which is lost in long ago. The old tree is leafless in the forest, the old year is ending in the frost, the old wound, if stricken, is the sorest, the old hope is hardest to be lost. But the young children, O my brothers, do you ask them why they stand weeping sore before the bosoms of their mothers in our happy fatherland? Notice the use of meter in there, and the constant changes that are coming to it. It's always a little uneven. The old tree is leafless in the forest. The old year is ending in the frost. The old wound, if stricken, is the sorest. The old hope is hardest to be lost. The emphasis, the stress is falling a little bit irregularly there, and the poem generally, throughout the whole poem, is keeping you a little off balance. You cannot settle too comfortably into any particular meter. It doesn't coax you into a sense of comfort. It is keeping you a little off center, a little on edge. They look up with their pale and sunken faces. Their looks are sad to see, for the man's hoary anguish draws and presses down the cheeks of infancy. Your old earth, they say, is very dreary. Our young feet, they say, are very weak. Notice the meter. Few paces have we taken, yet we are weary. Our grave rest is far to seek. Ask the aged why they weep, and not the children, for the outside earth is cold, and we young ones stand without in our bewildering, and the graves are for the old. She is here speaking for, she is creating a collective character. She is speaking for them and giving a voice to that third person pronoun we. First person plural pronoun we. The idea that she is doing this, you could say, is appropriating in some sense. It is a little bit questionable in many fields these days, but I would say that that is an artist's right, and artists have been speaking, adopting the personae of various people throughout time, and if they didn't, we would have nothing but speeches, and what's the fun of that? True, say the children, it may happen that we die before our time. Little Alice died last year. Her grave is shapen like a snowball in the rhyme. We looked into the pit, prepared to take her. Was no room for any work in the close clay. From the sleep wherein she lieth, none will wake her, crying, "Get up, little Alice, it is day." If you listen by that grave in sun and shower, with your ear down, little Alice never cries. Could we see her face, be sure we should not know her, for the smile has time for growing in her eyes. And merry go her moments, lulled and stilled in the shroud by the kirk chime. It is good when it happens, so the children, that we die before our time. Now that is emotional. That is arguably quite cloying. She is singling out. She's gone from the collective we, and now she's really identifying a specific character, little Alice, this idyllic little cherub, we would imagine, who has died. And if you can imagine a sadder thing than a dead child, I couldn't even begin to calculate that. But the exploitation of that, and I'm using that in a couple of different senses, that word exploitation, the exploitation of that is a little questionable. It is a little coarse to go there. And you're really getting the sense of Browning here squeezing the rag a little too much on that one, just trying to get a little too much emotion out of it. There is that tradition of sentiment and sentimentality that within Romanticism broadly that is difficult for modern readers to process, where part of that, and it's really part of the Romantic movement as well, highlights the ability to feel in a industrial, mechanized world of the Enlightenment, the idea of feeling as an individual, of feeling something deeply personal is valorized to a heroic degree in this tradition of literature, and she is using this. But in that, as readers, we have to struggle with, well, this is this very successful poet who is telling us that she is better than us. And she is very much positioning the us and them dialectic, because the first line singles out ye, you. She is pointing out at readers, and the perspective, the idea of looking is all over this poem. Remember the beginning of that first line, they look up, the children look up with their pale and sunken faces. They look up. And that's an interesting perspective that she's going to work out through this poem, because children, when they are in front of adults, will look up. And anyone, any human being, when looking towards God, looks up. And that blurring of the line is something that she's playing with here. But she is contrasting that to these other people or these other children who are perhaps bowed down with work so that they can't look up, and trying to get human beings to care about those other human beings is the work that this poem is trying to do. And sometimes, at least to my ears, and I would say modern ears post 20th century broadly, that's a tough nut to crack, because it is so alien to our more jaded perspectives. Alas, alas, the children, they are seeking death in life as best to have. They are binding up their hearts away from breaking with a ceremony from the grave. Go out, children, from the mine and from the city. Sing out, children, as the thrushes do. Pluck your handfuls of the meadow cowslips pretty. Laugh aloud to feel the fingertips your fingertips let them through. But they answer, are your cowslips of the meadows like the weeds anear the mine? Leave us quiet in the dark of the coal shadows from your pleasures fair and fine. Notice also the rhythm that is just all over the place there. The meter is just going crazy, and you're feeling, as you're reading this, almost schizophrenic because it is so erratic. For, oh, say the children, we are weary, and we cannot run or leap. If we cared for any meadows, we would merely drop down in them and sleep. That is a great little section of lines there. That quatrain is just heartbreaking. Our knees tremble sorely in the stooping. We fall upon our faces trying to go, and underneath our heavy eyelids drooping, the reddest flower would look as pale as snow. For all day we drag our burden tiring through the coal dark underground, or all day we drive the wheels of iron in the factories round and round. There, she's getting specific about the coal mines that were fueling, literally, the Industrial Revolution, and needed very small people to go crawling around in there and doing a lot of the work. And also factories, which were, of course, burning all of the coal to build stuff, to be the Industrial Revolution. The single out figures of the coal miners and the factory labor are a direct shot across the bow at everything that England was building itself from. England had some coal around Newcastle, of course, and was exploiting that to the best of its ability. And England made its empire by building stuff from materials, frankly, that it got from everywhere else. Materials that came largely from their empirical possessions, like for a while there, the colonial United States, or the colonial America, rather. And so this is a direct shot at English society and the polite English society that she came out of, to point out that, have you ever really thought about where all of your comfort comes from? Where all of those conveniences come from? What they mean? Bearing witness once again. For all day, the wheels are very important. The wheels are droning, turning. The wind comes from our faces till our hearts turn, our heads and pulses burning, and the walls turn in their places. Turns the sky in the high windows, blank and reeling. Turns the long light that drops down the wall. Turn the black flies that crawl along the ceiling. All are turning all the day, and we with all and all day. The iron wheels are droning, and sometimes we could pray, "Oh, ye wheels!" breaking out in a mad moaning, "Stop! Be silent for today!" That is industrialization. That is the wheels, the gears of industrialization. And you could hear it just grinding and grinding and grinding down on readers. The poem is putting the reader in the position of those children who have to hear all of this stuff all the time. And yes, you have the first person narrative of that telling you this is what I feel, but the way it is phrased with this very conspicuous turning, repetition, turning and wheels and grounding and moaning, all of that is constantly grinding and grinding again and again. And it gives you a sense of the cycles of suffering that have no end for these children. There is no way out. They are just doing it. They get up, they go to work, they come back, they go to sleep, they get up, they go to work, they go back, they go to sleep. Those rhythms of the day are backbreaking, and the erratic meter again is sort of grinding at you, and you have no respite in the middle of that. Be silent. Let them hear each other's breathing for a moment, mouth to mouth. Notice that we are back here out of the children's mouth, and we're back in the, we've been alternating a little bit, but here we are back in the poetic narrator's voice, telling everybody, or telling the factories and presumably any adults that are listening, to not object and to be silent. Be silent. Let them hear each other breathing for a moment, mouth to mouth. Let them touch each other's hands in a fresh wreathing of their tender human youth. Let them feel that this cold metallic motion is not all the life God fashions or reveals. Let them prove their living souls against the notion that they live in you or under you, O wheels. Still all day the iron wheels go onward, grinding life down from its mark, and the children's souls, which God is calling sunward, spin on blindly in the dark. More sense of the wheels and the grinding and the industrial repetition going on there, but notice also the blurring of the line between who is being addressed here. If not for all the life God fashions or reveals, let them prove their living souls against the notions that they live in you or under you, O wheels. Now, here, is this addressing the wheels themselves, the gears of a factory, the wheels of a cart of coal that gets pushed along a track? Or is that wheel a kind of metonymy or metaphor or symbol in some way for the owners, the capitalists who buy all of this stuff and run these factories and run these mines and are using these children as disposable materials? But also that curious line that they live in you or under you, O wheels. Now, maybe they live within the wheels and are being ground up in gears, and sure, that's a kind of a visceral image there, almost Dantean. But live in you sounds curiously Christian to me, sounds curiously religious generally to me. And maybe the poem is here addressing the wheels. Maybe they are addressing the capitalists or the public broadly who are enjoying all the fruits of industrialization. But living in you, maybe there's a little hint, just a little hint, of accusing God of allowing this to go on in his so-called perfect world. Because look how that stanza ends, grinding down life from its mark. The mark is, I would say, somewhat divine, and the idea of grinding it down from that into a kind of animal state is, well, that is a religious concept right there. And the image of which God is calling sunward, the children's souls, it's ending on an image of God. So that's daring for a good Christian lady like Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And look where it goes next. Now tell the poor young children, O my brothers, to look up to him and pray. Look up, like they did at the earlier thing, looking up. Look up to him and pray, so the blessed one who blesseth all the others will bless them another day. So now it is addressing God as something separate outside the poem, outside this conversation of the poem, but that comes after that uncertainty. So maybe it's just correcting it a little bit. Maybe you could say that, well, the poem doesn't know where it's going. Well, I would say that maybe she is hinting down towards one way and then goes another way. But the memory of that, the impression of that uncertainty, that accusing of God lingers somehow. They answer, who is God that he should hear us? Notice the debate that is going on now, and it is involving the people in the poem, but also us and this notion of our belief or understanding of God. Who is God that he should hear us while the rushing of the iron wheels is stirred? When we sob aloud, the human creatures near us pass by, hearing not or answer not a word, and we hear not for the wheels in their resounding, strangers speaking at the door. Is it likely God, with angels singing round him, hears our weeping any more? The noise is drowning out God himself, or God's ability to hear the children among that cacophony. 2 words instead of praying we remember in that midnight's hour of harm. Our Father, Lord's Prayer, our Father, looking upward in the chamber, we say softly for a charm. We know no other words except our Father, and we think that in some pause of angel song, God may pluck them with the silence sweet to gather, and hold both within his right hand, which is strong. Our Father, if he heard us, he would surely for they call him good and mild. Answer, smiling down the steep world very purely, come and rest with me, my child. So they are expressing a kind of faith that they're struggling with, and they have no practice of religion, of Christianity on a tangible, readily available basis to bridge over these doubts, because all they remember is Father, and they understand the concept of Father, somebody who's supposed to protect them from all this. And what do you do when the Father doesn't protect you? But no, say the children, weeping faster, he is speechless as a stone. And they tell us of his image is the master who commands us to work on. Go to, say the children up in heaven, dark, wheel-like, turning clouds are all we find. Do not mock us. Grief has made us unbelieving. We look up for God, but tears have made us blind. Do you hear the children weeping and disproving? Oh, my brothers, what you preach? For God's possible is taught by his world's loving, and the children's doubt of each. If the children have no experience of joy, they can have no understanding of God. And this is going to hit those polite upper class England, polite upper class England broadly in the gut, because they are certainly all going to be congratulating themselves for leading moral, upstanding lives and all of that. And it's a very human thing. But if they are denying God's grace to fellow human beings, to innocent children, what does that say about them? This is going to sting a little when it hits those polite tea parties throughout London. And well may the children weep before you, they are weary ere they run. They have never seen the sunshine nor the glory which is brighter than the sun. They know the grief of man without its wisdom, and they sink in man's despair without its calm. Are slaves without the liberty of Christendom, are martyrs by the pang without the palm, are worn as if with age, yet unretrievingly the harvest of its memories cannot reap, are orphans of the earthly love and heavenly. Let them weep, let them weep. More rhythmic dynamism in there, just bringing the experience of the poem to a kind of frenzy at that point. And this great line for the last stanza. They look up with their pale and sunken faces, and their look is dread to see. Oh, that's such a good line. For they mind you of their angels in high places, with eyes turned on deity. How long, they say, how long, O cruel nation, will you stand to move the world on a child's heart, stifle down with a mailed heel its palpitation, and tread onward to your throne amid the mart? Our blood splashes upward, O gold heaper, and your purple shows your path, but the child's sob in the silence curses deeper than the strong man in his wrath. It's quite the ending peroration there. It's very emotional. It is a stirring poem on that level, even if it is a little heavy-handed at times. This is a remarkable poem from many perspectives. It can be a bit repugnant at times because of the cloying sentimentality, because of the high-handed moralism that she's bringing to it. But if you do get past that and you start to get into the mechanics of it, you can start to see some more art, and maybe that will make you appreciate the broader parts of it a little bit more and excuse some of the overreach of it. These 13 stanzas are strong in many ways, just not the most objectively noticeable ones at first glance. The the trick of reading an awful lot of older poetry, stuff that is not from the modern age, is to put yourself to a degree into the perspective and the expectations of the poet of the time, and say, well, okay, what do you got? And then you can go and uh, exercise your own perspective and say, all right, yeah, I get it. You are trying to attract attract a broad audience who may not have much of a head for sophisticated poetry or sophisticated artistry of any kind. You're trying to attract their attention and shame them into public action. And she is here trying to shame the capitalists into public action. This was written in response. This poem was written in response to a report on child labor that had come out from the British government, and as part of the fever for reform throughout those middle 1800s. She is helping to push that along and basically put some heat underneath the lawmakers in Parliament and get real change in society. And there is great nobility in all of that, but it's not necessarily poetry at that point. Art has to be a little bit more distant. Art has to be a little bit more concerned with the aesthetics of something less narrow than just pure political concerns. It has to have an opening for the broader perspective of humanity than just a political tract. That's propaganda. But you can find movements in that direction here, in the direction towards higher art, towards something more human than just protest poetry. And you can go a lot of different ways with the protest poetry itself. There are critics who say that, well, this is, she's a rabble rouser and she's trying to change society and she's trying to do all of this. There are other critics who say that, well, no, okay, but look, she's actually arguing against industrialization. She's arguing against the rationalism of the Enlightenment. She is trying to go back to a kind of pre-industrial golden age, perhaps. You could read this as a bit of an elegy, as a lament for the modern world that they were living in, and say, well, we need to get back where children can run in the fields and play among nature and all of that stuff that has a certain Arcadian long ago feel to it. But put all of that aside, the poem as it does stand does have an awful lot of art going on, an awful lot of dynamism going on that points to what she could do as a poet if she just turned to, let's say, less contemporary topics, less political topics, less narrow, socially determined topics. But that wasn't the age she was living in. The great writers of her day tended to work in that space of social criticism. Dickens was almost an exact contemporary. He lived a lot longer, but his great works all bring out these same themes of child labor and poor slums and the brutal cost of modern life on the underclass. So you can fault Browning for a certain sentimentality, a certain cloying nature, a little high-handedness. but you still have to grant her that she was, and is a hell of an artist.